Greetings and welcome to The Thirsty Mage, the podcast that profusely apologizes to the workers at the employ throughout Costa del Sol. Hello, I'm David Lloyd, and yes, I'm the one that's been knocking over all the tables while scooting through the streets of the beach paradise on my Segway. This week is another deep dive into the world of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. This is episode, after looking at it, I'm pretty sure there's going to be 6 episodes. I believe there's 5 regions, if I'm correctly. Well, we're going to do all the regions plus one kind of wrap-up episode. So we're on number 3, which is the Corel Region. So this time we're picking up from the time that our toes touch the sand of Costa del Sol until our tears fall to the ground of Corel Desert. Joining me once again, still shaking out all the sand out of his shoes after spending too much time on the beach, it's Aiden Moore.
Hi, thanks so much for having me back. I live on an island, so being at the beach, kicking sand out of my sandals is it feels like home for me, and so does Costa del Sol because going back to the original game, it was literally my home way back when in 1997.
Yeah. It's funny. Casey's the big Final Fantasy XIV fan, but when I was playing, I still remember Costa del Sol being my probably my favorite place in Final Fantasy XIV. So it was interesting to see it in Rebirth and see its how it looks. It's funny too because the initial kind of introduction to Costa del Sol, it comes off as a very Hawaii theme, like with the people with I think they got like Laos when you're getting off the boat and that sort of thing, but I was already on a high from the Moonwalking Red 13 and the Queen's Blood tournament. Like the having that kind of intermission between the battling to have a fun tournament of Queen's Blood. I was just riding high and it kept on going. It's like this game is just all highs. There's no peaks and valleys. It's just a descent up a mountain of highs. It's just incredible.
Yeah, it's wild getting to Costa del Sol because the game, it's not very plot heavy. It's not very kind of linear in the way it tells its story in the same way that the remake was. And so I've seen a lot of people sort of bag on the fact that the group spends so much time meandering and getting into these sort of like low stakes situations, but I think that's just I guess because I have so much nostalgia for the original world, I really enjoy that part of it. And Costa del Sol, like you referenced it in your intro, but like ripping through Costa del Sol as Aerith on a Segway, like knocking everything over, just sort of feels kind of natural to the original game. And I think that like creating this world that you love to live in makes you want to save it. And Costa del Sol was just that. Like there's no stakes for anybody in Costa del Sol. They're all having a good time. It's not the slums. It's not, later on we go into like the Corel prison. It's not any of those, right? These are people on vacation living in a coastal town, just enjoying themselves. And the party sort of leaning into that was fun. And the way that it contrasts, Aerith and Tifa, like, they kind of take that step back to gain perspective, and Barrett's sort of like all like business, barreling forward. But I wouldn't have it any other way. And I think this region sort of exemplifies a lot of the original games, like, sort of intense storytelling matched with just a lot of weird, like, sections that didn't really have anything to do with the story. And way back then they were just trying to show off like how cool the PlayStation was, but this game I think has really kind of like taken that concept and spun it off into a world that's just enjoyable to be in. And this section that we're covering today, up until like I guess the final portion that we're going to talk about, really just like shows off how fun this world is.
Yeah, like it all feels well, it's fun. Like Costa del Sol specifically doesn't even feel like it's part of the world, because when like you go through, like you said, you go through Junon, and then it's like the wastelands there, and you see how the people live in Lower Junon, and then the grasslands was beautiful, but at the same time, like you had Midgar in the background, and all the pipes and everything looks dire, and then you get to Costa del Sol, and it's almost like nobody really even knows what's going on in the outside world. They're just
and drinking
margaritas.
Yeah, and it's like it sort of encapsulates the idea of sort of capitalist utopia, right? And even
Yeah.
Johnny's Inn, which is like such a hilarious segment, like sort of really nails at home, because you had this sort of grassroots hotel that existed and was probably successful until Shinra moved in and turned it into this like high stakes, big money getaway resort town. And so you sort of see on the surface, it's really chill. You're riding around on segways. There's a great beach. You get some swimsuits, but then, even so, there's sort of that undercurrent of like, this is still a gentrified, not even gentrified, I don't know what the word is, but like this is something that was taken from its original owners, and turned into something else that on the surface looks glitzy and looks appealing, but in reality, wasn't changed at the discretion of the people who originally, like, settled in Costa del Sol.
Yeah, well, and it's even funny that Johnny Seaside Inn is like hidden behind crates. Like you have to
Yeah.
walk through the crates,
Yeah.
even to get
I
there.
saw the crack. Like I was looking around. I was, I always poke through nooks and crannies, and I could see that like crack between the crates. And I was like, oh, we're
Yeah.
gonna go back there later. Like, what's back there? And back when I was in my 20s, I traveled a fair bit, and like I stayed at some places that you had to crawl between crates to get to. But those places also have to exist in a world, because there are people who need that and like and enjoy staying at that place rather than the big glitzy hotel right down on the water or whatever. So it's like, it's, I really like that Johnny is such a funny character, and for him to sort of have his like salvation by the end of that
Yeah.
storyline was really satisfying to me, especially because I don't think you can buy the Costa del Sol house, right? So in the original, you could spend 1,000,000 gil and buy the big house that has Costa del Sol's name written on it, and it would become your house. And the house, it's there in this game, but you can't buy it, as far as I know. And so, like, Johnny's Inn sort of becomes like the proxy for that
Yeah.
experience. And I think like later on, after we finish the portion that we're talking about today, I think it becomes sort of like a bit of a like second home for the characters. You can store some of your collectibles there. I think I'm not that far yet,
Yeah.
so I don't know for sure, but I'm from what I can tell, your collectibles go there and stuff. So it's nice that they kind of added that in there and kind of gave it a storyline that that fit in, and it was zany and it was funny, but it was also, you know, gave you something to do in Costa del Sol instead of just ripping right through, which I don't think would have been very satisfying.
No, and Costa del Sol itself is like just this big conglomerate of mini games. It's
Mm-hmm.
just from every region, and it does a terrific job of just not taking it very seriously. Like the whole point of doing these mini games is that you need not money, I guess, but you need to earn tokens
Yeah.
so that each of the characters can get an outfit that's
Yeah.
acceptable to be worn on the beach,
Yeah,
which is kind of
like,
funny.
yeah, you're not even allowed on the beach until you
Yeah.
have like a nice swimsuit or whatever,
Yeah.
which is pretty funny. But it also led to like one of my favorite sequences in the entire game so far, which was Tifa and Aerith's date.
Yeah.
And so, at one point you just, Cloud's kind of done his thing, and then Tifa and Aerith go out. They call it a date. They go around playing mini games, trying to get these tickets to get their swimsuits, picking out swimsuits together. And it's just like, it's really joyful to see the game kind of explore their friendship outside of, their relationship with Cloud. And it was fun and funny to see them, just spending that time together. And like skipping ahead a little bit, like we'll get to the date part at the Gold Saucer, but like I found the date sequence in Costa del Sol a lot more satisfying and interesting than the date sequence in the Gold Saucer, which is like,
Mhm.
one of the big moments people were sort of looking forward to. And there's like whole mechanics to go into the Gold Saucer date. But it sort of fell flat. And in part because we had this like really likable, funny, sweet, extended scene with the two women.
Yeah, and it's funny that there's like some light consequences to the choices that are made too,
Yeah.
because depending on
The
whether
swimsuit.
the
Yeah, yeah,
swimsuit
yeah.
matches what Cloud's wearing,
Yeah, yeah,
it can affect your
yeah.
relationship with the girls, which is
Yeah.
hilarious.
I was so mad about that when I got the
Yeah.
wrong, I made the wrong choice. I matched up, I wanted a date with Aerith, and I matched up Tifa and Cloud, and I was like, oh,
Oh,
do
yeah.
I reload my save? I was like, no, I can't do that.
It was pretty far back too when you
It,
get Like it's not just like a few minutes behind. It was probably like an hour or two back. So
Yeah, like I would have had to have gone back quite a bit. That's right.
yeah. So there's a bunch, yeah, like we said, a bunch of mini games that you have to play to earn the tokens.
Yeah.
Is there any in particular that you found more fun than the others?
Um, None. I don't know.
No.
I really like the mini games. Like, and I know some people are really like people are divided on the mini games. I think that they're like they were an interesting part of the original. I think they're good in this one. Some of them are good. Queen's Blood remains great.
Yeah,
Some of them are bad. Like the Red 13 playing Rocket League, which like
that's pretty funny.
in concept I think was good, but his
Yeah,
controls are so tanky. Like he
yeah,
takes so long just to like turn and like pivot, and you're trying to hit this moving like relatively small moving ball, and I found like I just didn't have the like fine control I needed over him to like get myself to knock the ball in the direction I wanted it to go. And like I don't know, the shooting mini game, I couldn't invert the controls, so I just like it was torturous to
oh yeah,
me. But what I really liked actually, so there was one that I really liked. I really liked that they introduced sort of the gimmick matches to Queen's Blood. I thought that was really
oh
cool.
yes, yeah, I like that
Rather
one.
than
Yeah,
just straightforward Queen's Blood, they become little puzzles essentially. And I really liked that. It was just an interesting take on the game that made you think about the cards from a different perspective, but also kind of taught you higher level techniques and higher level ways of thinking about sort of the strategy within the card game that
yeah,
you
and
can
it
take
forces
forward.
you to update your decks. Like I
Yes.
know there's like 5 or 6 slots that you can make decks, but I think I
Yeah.
pretty much rode the same deck for.
Yeah.
I would tweak it depending on what cards I picked up at any
Yeah.
given time, but I
Yeah.
pretty much kept
Yeah.
kept to the same deck. But there it was like no, like you have to make changes.
Yes.
You have to utilize the slots and
Yeah.
tailor it to those specific
Yeah.
conditions in those matches.
And like there are cards now that destroy opponents' cards or your own cards or get stronger when cards have been destroyed, and I probably generally would have stayed away from that. I find that I'm fairly defensive when I play Queen's Blood, but those matches force you to engage with those cards, and then I ended up creating a deck that was focused on like being aggressive and destroying my opponent's cards. And I was like, oh, there's a lot of you play the game in an entirely different way, you think about the game in a different way based on the style of deck you played. So the fact that they had those sort of gimmick matches and then they come back up later on at Gold Saucer, I really like that aspect of it. I think you have to beat one of them? Do you have to? I can't remember. It was a little ways back. I'm not a fan of when they force you to play Queen's Blood because I think that can be very challenging for some people.
Yeah.
Um, but I do like that that's there.
Yeah, I enjoyed the callbacks to remake with the characters. Like you said, we got Johnny, and so we're helping Johnny out, which is a great throwback. Like I was playing the original Final Fantasy lately,
Mm.
and just realizing that Johnny is just like a throwaway character from the
Yeah,
first
yeah, yeah,
game.
yeah, yeah. But he is in
And
Costa del Sol. Like he does
yeah,
show up there. But yeah,
much more important in this game. Yeah,
much more important. And I
yeah,
mean, like that just exemplifies the whole remake project, right? Like they took all of these aspects that in the original game were sort of like caricatures or like abstractions of other ideas or personalities, and
hmm,
you sort of like they gave them a little bit of screen time or whatever, but this game really like builds on those and turns Johnny into like he feels like the same Johnny from the original game, even though the original character didn't really have anything to him at all. And the way that they kind of build out and fill the space within all those sort of abstract ideas from the original, just it works from like a metatextual level on the story and what they're doing with the story, but it also works on that sort of fine detail level of like, yeah, Johnny would be hustling
yeah,
in Costa del Sol trying to start an inn, right? Like I have a friend who's down in Mexico, like hustling, selling timeshares and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, like those two remind me of each other.
yeah,
Not like my friend's not goofy like Johnny is, but like that sort
yeah,
of drive to like, find something, find a crack to fill and sort of like, become great at that. I think that's what Johnny wants to do. That's what my friend wants to do. And I'm like, yeah, that makes so much sense for Johnny.
yeah. And I loved the whole sequence. So when you finally get your beach attire and you're allowed down on the beach, it's Cloud's reaction to the girls is pretty funny. But then I laughed out loud when Hojo came down with an entourage.
Yeah, yeah.
Like this seems so out of character, but I love it because it's just hilarious. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, he's talking about them being his assistants and
Yeah.
stuff, and then all of a sudden, I don't know where the black robes are getting turned into monsters, and
Yeah.
he's just finding it hilarious.
And then I like how you can talk to the, his entourage later, and they're like, "Oh no, we didn't like him. We were just
Yeah,
doing our job,"
yeah,
like, which is pretty funny. The
yeah.
whole I can't really remember how the Hojo thing plays out in the original, like in detail. He just kind of shows up on the beach, doesn't he? A little bit, like it's not an extended sequence, is it?
No, I don't. I don't even remember. I remember. I think he was there, but I don't remember like a fight or anything. I
Yeah,
almost. It
yeah.
was just like he was just kind of there.
Yeah, it's been a couple of years since I played the
Yeah,
original, and I was surprised that it turned into, like such a big conflict with them. But they had, again, like filling in space kind of requires them to add tension,
yeah.
add stuff like combat. And like, how great was it when Cloud
I forgot.
they like
You realized he had no sword.
they set that up, like he had to leave his sword behind. They have a whole
Yeah,
scene of him like putting his sword away and stuff. And then like when he grabs at his sword and it's not there,
yeah.
and then he grabs
Grabs the
he
umbrella.
grabs the umbrella, and it's just like that level of like humor is so funny. And it's like
Yeah,
I also like that it like doesn't impact him in combat, right? Like he's not all of a sudden useless. It doesn't become a gimmick fight where he has like useless physical attacks. It's just funny, right? Like the game just doesn't take itself too seriously in moments like that. And those
yeah,
moments of levity, I think, then get, really allow you to lean into sort of the melodrama that fills other parts of the games.
yeah.
Which is really
Well,
cool.
and then the levity continued when Yuffie somehow manages to clone
Yeah.
Johnny,
Yes.
and she doesn't even herself know
Yeah.
how it happened. It was just like, I have ninja skills, and
Yeah.
they're and yeah, she's like, oh, I don't know, like it.
Yeah. She has no idea
Didn't
how it
think about
happened.
it as basically the
It's so good. Yuffie
yeah,
is incredible. Like she's so good as like the fact that she was like an optional character in the original game and they've turned her into one of the most sort of charming and charismatic and like appealing characters in this version of the game is remarkable to me. The way that she like, and I really like, she finally joins the team for good in Costa del Sol.
yeah,
And I like how they sort of inverted it on the original, because in the original you have to encounter her a few times, like you have to sort of like bait her out to like join your team. She's reluctant to join you, whereas in this game she's like following you around, like trying to join your team for
yeah,
hours, like for so long. And Cloud's just like, no, like, who are you? Go away.
yeah.
And then
I
he
like
finally sort of like
there's some
reluctantly brings her on board, and she's so happy. I don't
there's
really get why she's there. She just wants materia, I suppose. Oh, she wanted to join
uh,
Avalanche, right? That was like
yeah.
the
I guess it
DLC.
was kind of because initially she was in Junon, and I know there was like the assassination attempt on um, the Rufus there, and it almost felt like I guess she was just trying to get away, and then but she did have that admiration for like the splinter cell of Avalanche from
Yes,
the from in
integrate.
Integrate, yeah.
Yeah,
So when she finally met up with them, there, I think there's a little bit of hero worship there. And then I guess when she saw them kind of in action, it's like, okay, like clearly, these are the guys that I should be around. And yeah,
yes,
there's some funny interactions where she's standing at the corner in front of the big building there, and yeah, like if you talk to her, there's some funny,
yeah.
funny lines between her and Cloud.
Yeah, she's so good. Whenever you
Yeah.
bump into her, like for her optional dialogue out on the street,
Yeah.
she's always worth talking to, for sure.
But even the trek up Mount Corel, where they convince her to go up there, it's usually they just tell her there's materia and she'll go along with whatever. But having her and Barrett kind of, I think Red 13 was the other one that they all went ahead, and
Yeah.
I always laughed at like I guess it was supposed to be like chalk that she was leaving for Cloud.
Yes. Her pictures of
The
Barrett
funny
were so
pictures.
good. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was fantastic. And just again, like another layer to Yuffie as like, an optional character who is sort of like, outside of a little side quest, and then character animations in the original, she didn't really have a personality, but they like somehow managed to like take that small little nugget of personality and turn it into something that felt like fleshed out and a whole, and those little diagrams just add to it, right? Like she's just having fun in a way
Yeah.
that like contrasts so well against Cloud and Barrett, who are not having fun ever, right?
Yeah.
Aerith is having fun. She has a twinkle in her eye, but she's also very, quiet and sort of reserved in her personality. And Tifa is, also sort of reserved and tentative in a lot of interesting ways, but doesn't have that big bursting outward personality. And Yuffie just brings that aspect to the team that I think was probably missing in the first one. You got it a bit in like Biggs and Wedge and Jesse, and she sort of fills that role as well, right? Like these kind of boisterous personalities that don't need to drive the narrative along, don't need to carry sort of the emotional punch for the story, but provide the balancing side to those things.
Yeah, lights up the room whenever she's in it, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I guess before we go up Mount Corel, there's a pivotal moment, I think, in the story where I think it's right before Tifa and Aerith kind of go on their date, where Red 13 is in Aerith's room, and they discuss that her white materia has gone clear.
Yeah.
And because I remember in the first episode, I think we had talked about how in Remake, it really seemed like Aerith kind of at least had an understanding of what was happening, that the story was changing, that the Whisperers were trying to keep the original story the way it was going, and we're kind of getting meddling, I guess, with the new direction. But she mentions that the Whisperers had stolen the I guess like the essence of the materia, and that's when Red 13 explains that basically the materia kind of holds the world's memories and thoughts. So that's kind of I felt like that was the developers telling us that it's a clean slate. Aerith doesn't know what's going on.
It's like this Aerith doesn't anymore, right? But then, again, skipping ahead a little bit, there's later in this section that we're talking about today, there's flash sideways, to like use a parlance from Lost, where we sort of go into the other timeline, and Zack is taking care of Aerith and Cloud, and you can see her white materia is there, and it's full, it's cloudy, it has all its colors. So like that white materia, obviously anyone who's played the game knows the white materia is important, but it very obviously plays a different role in this story, and the way that you have sort of this like bifurcated path for Aerith. I'm curious. I know you're near the end of the game. I'm not. I'm just up to the end of the section we're talking about today. I'm very curious to see where that goes, and what they do with it.
Nothing. What's funny is that there hasn't really been any mention of it again since. But I know I know in the end game of the very finale there's going to be something. I've done some a lot of dancing on social media every time I see anything in relation to the final.
All I know is it's kind of divisive.
That's
the original.
That's the only thing I've heard. Because I immediately close whatever browser I'm in if I see something come up.
That's where I'm at too. The other weird thing about that scene, and I guess like any scene where Cloud sort of like spies on Aerith and Red 13, is Red 13 talking in that child's voice, like, and what that's all about too. And like the original didn't have voice acting, but it's interesting to kind of see them carrying on, a relationship that's like private to them, and they both sort of have these secrets that they're holding on to, that they're sharing. And the idea as well that Red 13 is, she's confiding in him as somebody who it sounds like she's looking to for sort of advice or perspective. And what does that mean for Red 13, and any sort of knowledge that he might have of what's happening or what's going on. I always go back sort of to the very end of the original Final Fantasy VII, where you see like, the very, very final shot is like Red 13 and some little Red 13 cubs looking over Midgar as it's been grown over by the planet again. And I wonder like with the Red 13 stuff, and how that sort of ties back into some of his story in the original game. But I might be totally off. You might know more than I do. And
that is directly addressed soon.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
It's like the Cosmo Canyon stuff. Like you find out a lot about Red 13. And you do find out in the original that he's like younger than everybody thinks he is, or something.
I'll leave it at that.
Fair enough.
But Cosmo Canyon is a region later in the game, and it's kind of I would say it's kind of like his time to shine.
Okay.
Would be
Yeah,
the way
yeah.
I'll put it. Yeah.
He definitely like has taken a back seat in this game so far. Like there's, he's kind of tagging along, but doesn't really have a whole lot of impact narratively.
No, he's usually kind of in the background. Whenever they stop, he's usually hiding from kids and stuff.
Yes, that
Uh,
stuff is so good.
yeah,
Whenever they want to pet him and stuff, like I do like that.
yeah. Up until the moonwalk. I'm
Oh
so
yeah,
glad they left
that
that
whole
whole
scene was
sequence.
so good. And
Yeah,
like again, like just going back to the game, like the game totally could have like left all of that out, right? Like it could have been embarrassed by what the original was, but it wasn't. It leaned into it and is so much better for it. Like Red 13 playing Queen's Blood and like wandering around as a sailor or a a soldier or what are they called in this game? They're not soldiers because soldiers are soldiers, capital
Oh,
level soldiers. But
troopers, I think,
troopers,
like the
troopers,
Shinra
yeah,
troopers.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. That's just great. It's fun and it's funny and it shows sort of like just a respect for the original that wants to like celebrate what it was, not what it might be if it was made from scratch in 2024.
yeah. I think for the most part, it's easy enough to skip the Mount Corel stuff because
Yeah,
I felt it was kind of miserable to a certain extent.
yeah. The whole thing where like the best part was when Aerith was like winded, and that was just cute, right?
Yeah,
Like, how
like the
she would,
grappling around as
yeah, yeah.
Yuffie
Like
in that section
as
was
soon
like,
as you split
we
off
could have
from
just,
them, yeah,
yeah,
that,
this whole section could have been
yeah,
cut out if they needed to,
yeah.
but
I did like that they had the minecart game in there because I like,
that, yes, that was fun.
it was sort of like when the original came back. That was not long after like Donkey Kong Country, and its minecart games and stuff, and it had that silly little like minecart sequence, in the
Mm.
original. So I was glad that was in there. But yeah, the whole like grappling around, like lowering the bridge, that part was,
Mm.
yeah. I
Did
don't
you
like
set up the route for Barrett or for Yuffie?
for Barrett, of course.
Oh, really? I went
Of
with Yuffie.
course, yeah.
I don't remember why, but I just remember thinking maybe I was trying to even out
Yeah. I
the
didn't even
affections because I know she was a little bit behind. So I'm
right.
like, yeah, I'll
Yeah,
give you a break this time.
she's way behind for me.
Yeah.
I didn't even clue in that would have an impact on the
Oh,
the relationships. And so like
yeah,
after the end, like Yuffie was like, mad at Cloud, and then it was like, this affected your relationship with
yeah,
Yuffie. And I was like, oh, like
yeah.
positively? Like I think she actually had fun going off the big jump. But
Well, I read a funny story about. I guess the voice actor for Yuffie was so good at making throw up sounds that they actually had to dial it back.
God.
They said it's just a little too real.
Yeah,
We
yeah. It's
gotta
like
dial this
make it
back a bit.
caricature of throwing
Yeah,
up, not actual gagging, wet
yeah.
gagging sounds.
I would
Yeah,
say the best part of that whole sequence was Cloud Junior.
Cloud Junior. Which was Cloud Junior?
Oh, the little chocobo with the hair.
Oh my gosh, yes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes. And I love how they like, they first met Cloud Junior and who was it? Tifa and Yuffie were like, "Oh my gosh, it's Cloud." And then
yeah,
like, half an hour later you reunite with Cloud and Aerith is like, "Huh." And she like comes to the same realization like on
yeah.
her own, without having to be keyed in. That was a cute little callback. I liked going up, I liked the first trek up like the gondola run in Mount Corel, like that part where you get split up, like, and maybe that's just because like there's a ski mountain close to me, so it kind of reminded me a bit of home, climbing
Yeah.
up the mountain, just like a unique environment in like a RPG to be climbing up. But it also like everything from like the bottom of Mount Corel to getting to the gold saucer did seem a little superfluous, especially because like everything from Costa del Sol to that point was so enjoyable.
Mhm. Well, even like the village of Corel, I felt like I kind of blew through it
Yeah,
because
me too.
I
Yeah.
saw the sign for Golden Saucer and I'm like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's
yeah,
like there's a bit to do there. I guess I played some Queen's Blood matches and did a little quest.
yeah, not too
Yeah,
much. Like the doctor, you get a bit of a storyline of where it's explained that that's the doctor
yes.
that ended up saving
Saving youth.
Tifa.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Saving Tifa. And then you find out later he also saved Barrett and like grafted
yeah,
Barrett's like which like man, that's like an advanced medical technique, like for
Yeah.
like a backwater doctor to be performing
Yeah.
twice, because he probably saved Dyne, so he probably also knew that Dyne was alive.
Yeah.
But yeah, the North Corel stuff, like I like that they put these little mini villages throughout the world. You know, that's been a criticism of past Final Fantasy games, like, you know, 13 just didn't have towns and stuff. So like the fact that they put these little communities here and there that have, you know, mini quest lines and stuff, I think it's good. It's like North Corel was not my favorite part of the game. I didn't stay there any longer than I had to, but I was
Yeah.
happy it was there.
No, I would say the main draw of this region is definitely the golden saucer. And
Yeah.
yeah, I remember I saw an interview with Katase, and they were talking about how they really wanted to make this like an attraction. Like, I think they're going like,
Mhm.
we want to make this like the Disney World of the
Yeah.
Gaia, or what, I guess just
Yeah.
this incredible, and it blew my expectations out of
Yeah.
the water, because
It's big, like it's glitzy. It's
yeah,
like,
it's so big. You
yeah.
need a Moogle to
Yeah,
teleport you
yeah.
around, because like it just takes too long to walk everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. I
And
like that they leaned into that, right? Like I like
yeah,
that they made it feel vast. Instead of making it a little more convenient. Like they, you know, they could have made it smaller. They could have made it easier to get around or connected the various regions, but like they didn't. They just
yeah,
they spaced everything out so each place could have its own spectacle. And then of course it was all interconnected and seamless, right? If it
yeah.
had been closer together, everything would have been butting up on each other. And those like slidey walkways are just
Yeah, it was like,
fun.
yeah, like kind of these, I don't know, they're like conveyor belty, but there's like
Yeah, they like
no actual
gravity.
belt. It was
They
just
just
like,
like,
no, we're just gonna
yeah,
zoom you up here.
yeah.
That's all
It's
right.
like, you know, those trains
Yeah,
that use like magnets, like um
yeah, I guess that'd be kind of
it's
it.
like the same thing, but you're the magnet.
Yeah,
You just like kind of hover along
yeah.
at hyper speed. It's pretty fun. Like I could have used the Moogle to get around, but I didn't because I liked
Oh yeah,
taking those things. Like I just want to go on one in real life. It's like the airport. You know, you're at the airport and they have conveyor belts along the ground, but they're slow. And these ones are fast, and
yeah.
fast is fun.
And I love the whole sequence at the beginning where you get there, and there's like the song and dance, and Yuffie just joins in like it's nothing, and
Yes,
then
with her like costume and
yeah,
stuff. Yeah,
that's right. All of a sudden
yeah,
she's in a costume, and then Cloud's fighting Dio, and it's
yeah,
in
yeah,
like the
yeah.
original
Yeah,
polygonal
that
look and
was good.
everything.
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
great. Dio is so funny. He's like so big and burly and muscular. And I
yeah,
like how like, you know, you fight him and he's in his little like, you know, wrestler underpants and his
yeah,
cape. And then I like how like you meet him later when there's been like, you know, a shootout in the lobby. You know, there's a guy on the lam, like, and he's still just wearing his little wrestler underwear. And
yeah,
like, you know, like he didn't go put on a suit. He didn't go put on anything else. He just like is always in his little underwear and his cape, and that's just
yeah.
great because like to frankly, if I looked like that, I would probably go everywhere in my underwear and my cape too. Like why wouldn't you, right?
Yeah. Oh, I love when they go back. Jumping ahead a little bit, but when they go back after a certain sequence, Dio is still wearing everything, but he's bandaged up. so,
That's,
so he's just
I
got
haven't
like,
got that far. That's so good.
oh, yeah, you gotta go
No,
back because he's got like
yeah.
a band-aid on his face, and
Oh,
he's got like his
amazing.
arm
Yeah,
taped up or
yeah.
whatever,
And he's still in
and
his underpants, right?
yeah, he's
Like
still in his
yeah,
underpants.
that's so
Like, yeah,
good.
yeah, and they even call him out for him, like, "Are you
Yeah,
okay?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm fine."
yeah. He'll persevere.
Yeah.
That's good.
But yeah, the amount of detail in here, I guess we'll start with like the mansion. So when they initially get to the Golden Saucer, everything's booked up, and this is where they meet. I would never have guessed that it was Kate's pronounced Kate Sith. I think I
Yeah,
was like made fun of for back in the day for pronouncing it that way.
yeah,
But that's the way the game went with, and Kate helps hacks into the hotel system, which is
yeah.
a hilarious sequence where he ends up taking the Turks, and I can't remember that guy's name.
Palmer.
Palmer. Yeah,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
take the reservation
Yeah,
and switch it
it's
over.
so good.
Yeah,
During that sequence, he seems to have like it's almost not like he's hacking in, but he has some sort of level of authority and access. Because
yeah,
later on, Cloud and Co are like denied access to a back room area, and then the guy like gets a call from Kate Sith saying like, oh no, these guys are good, like let them through. And it's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, like he's not just a weird cat thing. I mean, he is just a weird cat thing with a Scottish accent, Welsh
Yeah,
accent.
Scottish. Yeah,
I
I
like,
mistakenly called it Irish,
yeah,
and I was like, no, no, it's Scottish. Yeah, totally Scottish.
yeah, which is funny because like, you know, I don't know if this game goes into it, but when you find out sort of like what the deal with Kate Sith is, it's like, why does he have a Scottish accent? Like nobody else has a Scottish accent in this game. So like, where would it come from? Like if somebody has a Scottish accent, like they need to come from a place with Scottish accents, right? Like somebody else has to have a Scottish accent. But I thought that his sort of like ephemeral, like insistent introduction as he sort of forced Cloud into like taking his help was really good.
Yeah,
Because in the original he's like even stranger. Is like why
yeah,
why is this guy on Cloud's team? Like
yeah,
this doesn't make any sense. Whereas in Rebirth he's sort of like he has things that Cloud needs, and Cloud sort of
yeah.
can't proceed forward without Kate
Well,
Sith's help.
they certainly seem more willing to trust him in this game than I
Yes,
felt like in the original. So
yes,
yeah,
totally. And I think that's because he was offering them more, right?
yeah,
In the original, I felt like he was a little more like, you know, you'd be like, why is Cloud going along with this stuffed animal riding a bigger stuffed animal? It's like it's
yeah.
strange.
And I love the detail in the hotel room,
Yes, yeah,
with all the Tonberry stuff.
a little humidifier.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
humidifier. I love too. There's a door. There's a door next to the
yeah,
door that leads outside, and
yeah,
if you open it, there's like a picture of a Tonberry painted
yeah.
onto like. It's almost supposed to be like a surprise of like you open
Yeah.
the door and the Tonberry's gonna like knife you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But like I like how the game keep like it's like trolls you, right? Like a little bit, like you click
yeah,
on things and stuff. But like the worst thing, the scariest thing, the most awful thing in there is you open a treasure chest and then you get one gold saucer point, but
yeah,
nothing, everything is in increments of I think 10. So
yeah.
like you just perpetually have
One.
one,
Yeah,
151, 386,
yeah,
like 11 gold saucer points. You can never get rid of that one, and it drives me insane. And it's obviously intentional and makes me laugh.
yeah,
Every time I see it in my, my balance there, because it's like, there's the Tonberry behind the door, there's, the handprints on the wall, there's the genie bottle, and then there's just like the mimic chest that gives you one gold saucer,
yeah,
and that's like the most cruel thing in the hotel. But I
yeah.
thought that the hotel was
Very clever.
beautiful
Yeah,
also. I
yeah.
think the game, like,
Oh, and the receptionist that comes down from
yeah,
the ceiling.
drops down and scares everybody. It was so good when the Turks showed up.
Yeah,
And like Elena was like just lost her mind.
yeah.
But then Rude is just standing there like completely like
Stonewall.
unstartled and
Yeah.
totally stoic. And it's just like, oh, this is so
He's
good.
probably been there. He's probably been there a few
He
times.
knew what was coming, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Elena's fabulous in this game. She's so
Yeah.
good. Another one of those characters that like, kind of played an archetypal role in the original but was fairly flat, that they've sort of like expanded into something that's far more interesting and just feels like a real person, right? Like the
Yeah.
Turks in the original were interesting because they had their own motivations. They were sort of like flawed, or not just completely linearly driven in their motivations. They sort of help out sometimes, or they turn, to look the other way. And that's very complex for an older game. Like in 1997, that was unusual to see. But I think that they've taken those things from the original game and not just made them, actions, but also kind of imbued that in the Turks themselves, as you kind of see that more of their personalities.
Mhm. So this was the point where we have our initial date with someone, and
Yes.
who was it with for you?
It was Aerith, my girl Aerith, which I was
Oh, okay.
quite happy about. I got about halfway through the date before I realized it was the date, though.
Oh
Like
yeah,
she knocked on the door and I was like, "Oh, there's Aerith. Let's go check around."
yeah.
But yeah, and then I took her on the most awful date of all time. Um, which, like I was saying earlier, the Tifa and Aerith date was so good,
Yeah.
and like felt like them hanging out. Whereas this one, it was like Cloud was like walking in front of Aerith, like 9 feet in front of her the whole time, and like I spent more time talking to like Tifa and Yuffie and like
Yeah.
Madam M than I did
Yes, right.
like actually talking to Aerith. You know, I got shut out at the Chocobo races. The play had ended. You know, it was just
Yeah.
like, this is not. You know, it was such a unique time in the original game, and I feel like for me it fell a little flat in this game because you
Yeah.
don't get the carousel ride, which is like the best part of the
Uh,
date, right? Well,
I hope.
like, I mean, maybe later you do,
Yes.
but at this stage, so you sort of
Yeah.
like you're wandering around the two of you, and like Aerith has some cute things to say, but otherwise it just kind of like feels like Cloud doing his thing, like you know when
Yeah.
you're in high school and you don't know how to be around
Yes, right.
another girl or another boy, like you're out on a date, you're kind of like don't really know what you're doing, like, and I guess that fits Cloud. He didn't really, I think, realize it was a date. But
Yeah.
who did you get?
I got Aerith as well.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I find clever with this, and it's easy now because I've done the other date,
Right.
is it does a terrific contrast of where Cloud is and where he ends up, because
Right.
it's so much of a
Interesting.
different experience. So I
Yeah.
think that
Okay.
so looking back at it, I'm like, oh, the fact that it was so awkward is actually kind of awesome,
Okay. Oh,
because
that's interesting.
yeah,
I
uh,
can see how they would play off of that because Cloud is
mm,
awkward, and it felt awkward to me. It didn't feel satisfying, but if it's not the culmination,
yeah.
that opportunity
Oh no,
for
it's
growth is there. That's
completely different to
yeah,
like
yeah.
later
Oh,
on,
it's
but
fun. That's cool.
um
I wondered, like, can you take Barrett on a date at this stage? Because like
I
mid
almost
date,
wonder if you have to take Aerith in this one. I haven't,
yeah.
unless somebody else has
No,
had someone
somebody,
else
yeah, one of
at
my
this
friends
point.
got Tifa.
Oh,
He
in
like
the
he
first one.
actually got
Okay.
Red 13 by accident, and then
Yeah.
and then rolled back to an earlier save to like juice up Tifa's
Yeah.
relationship so he could get Tifa. So you can definitely get Tifa. You can definitely get Red 13. I don't know if you can get Yuffie. It doesn't seem like you could possibly build up
Uh
her like
not
affection.
in the first one, I don't think. I know
Yeah.
in the second one you can literally get anyone,
Right. Okay.
and I've
Maybe.
watched them
Yeah.
all, and
Yeah.
some of
Are they
them
good?
are so
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Well, the Barrett one
I
was
was
really
like
good in the
killing
first game.
myself
Yeah,
laughing.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. I'll have to do that after I kind of get through.
Yeah, I had to wait till I saw the first one, and
Yeah.
then the I guess that's the other thing is the affection points make a huge difference in the later one, because there's different, like there's a potential date for anyone in the party, but then there's also like different levels of the date itself
Oh,
based
interesting.
on the
Oh,
affection.
okay.
So
Interesting.
I had mentioned to Casey, there's a couple. I'm sure we'll get to it later in the other episodes, but there's a couple quests that I would actually recommend people do before they go on that date, that second date, because you kind of have to do these other side quests that aren't in the main story, that will boost the affection for that meeting
Right.
down the road. So
Yeah. So you're trying to
just
like maximize the date potential, not just who you
yeah, that's
get,
right.
but like, oh,
That's
okay.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So it's definitely worth it.
Yeah, I remember
Um,
like when I got my because I got a review copy a little early and it was under embargo, and like one of the things I wasn't allowed to talk about were the date mechanics, and I was like, well, like you just halfway through the game you go on a date at Gold Saucer, like what could really be like the big deal? But it's cool that they recognize that that was a really appealing part of the first game for a
mhm,
lot of people. And like this game, I feel like more than almost any other like console RPG, especially of the time, really leans on character relationships to like drive forward its, you know, emotional beats. And so the team, once again, I just think really understood what made the original so appealing to people,
mhm,
which is remarkable because, you know, they have a team of people who, you know, some of them worked on the original game, and then they have a bunch of younger people who grew up with the original game, and those people would have very different ideas of what was good about it. And the fact that they just like nailed everything is I still can't quite believe it.
yeah. Well, it's funny, the like so the I know there's the whole, like, some people who grew up with the original are very like Clarith, like, Cloud and Earth are supposed to
Yeah,
end
yeah,
up together.
yeah,
But after like other games have come out, and
yeah,
and even in Rebirth and Remake, I
yeah,
feel like in the original it was much more ambiguous of like which,
yeah,
what relationship were they really like
Yeah.
canon or whatever,
Yeah.
however you want to put it. Like, who was he? Who were they really pushing him towards? I feel like Aerith was much more at the forefront there, whereas in
Yes.
this one, it feels like they're really lining up Tifa as the you know
Yeah.
companion to Cloud,
Yeah.
I guess we would
Well,
put it.
like,
Like, I don't feel that same
no.
tension with Aerith
No,
that was
and
in the
like
original.
even in this date, the first date, like Aerith's role isn't sort of like she's never wooing Cloud, right? Like she doesn't really
No,
come across as though she's like enamored with Cloud. She finds him sort of amusing. I think she carries a lot of like love for him, but it's in a way of wanting to sort of like help him grow. Like again, like going back to this idea that like in the first game, it seemed like she knew what was going on, and like if she knows the big twist is coming, I could see her sort of being like, okay, well, my fate is what my fate is, and I need to help Cloud see what's right in front of him, what he's had in his life this whole time with Tifa.
yeah,
But on the flip side, like he also like there's a lot of baggage between him and Tifa. Like he's telling all these stories, and Tifa's like, "What the? That didn't happen. Like that didn't
yeah.
happen at all." That's a lot of baggage to work through for two people.
Well, and at the same time, at this point in the game, Aerith doesn't know the fate of Zack.
Yes.
So, and then if like for those who have played Crisis Core, um, I guess you wouldn't have known this in the original if you just played the original. But in Crisis Core, like Zack and Aerith they
Yes.
have a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And that as like you say, as we've gotten sort of a more expanded look at all of this, like Zack and Aerith feel more real. Like they have a long history together in a way that Cloud and Aerith don't. And Cloud and
Yeah.
Aerith sort of have like a fun chemistry, but not necessarily like, like a deep seated, like, filling the hole in each other's soul, that's shaped like each other or whatever, in the way that,
Yeah.
Cloud and Tifa have all of these shared experiences that they can kind of go back
Well,
to.
and with this game too, now that you have the alternate timeline, it's actually like showing that that closeness, where Zach is like, uh, I guess I don't want to get too much into it because I don't remember. I'm so far into the game that I'm like, oh, I'm not sure where the stories
Yeah.
come and go, so I won't say too much about that.
Well,
But
yeah, I mean,
you know,
I just play that part. And what you see is like sort of tension between Zach and Aerith's mom in that flash sideways, flash back, flash
yeah,
whatever. That you can tell that there's sort of tension there that Zach has this like intense level of care for Aerith that wouldn't be just like, he met her, he has a crush on her or whatever. There's something more there, and the way that he sort of like, despite what is Aerith's mom's name? Elmira? No.
Elmira, yeah,
Is that Elmira?
yeah, yeah,
What's
it's Elmira. I'm
what's
almost
Marlene's
positive.
mom's name? Anyway,
Um,
in any case, Aerith's mom, like, sort of pushes Zach away when she first finds Zach caring for Aerith. And she
yeah.
says, like, oh, look at her. Like, you're not doing a good job. She needs to come back to my house. And Zach's like, whoa, you can't do that. They're staking out your house. But he goes with her. He continues to follow through and refuses to sort of be, pushed to the side. And I think that shows that like depth of relationship that they have, um,
Well, and
going,
it's interesting
going,
too
going further
because
back.
at this point, uh, like this is kind of new territory for that relationship because in the original game, Zach was dead at this point. So now you've got
Yes.
Zach alive, and you've got this
But
new story in that
yeah,
timeline for Cloud
yeah,
and Aerith.
yeah,
And then it's still ambiguous of like what's going on with Cloud because everyone seems to know Cloud
yeah,
differently than he knows Cloud.
yes. Well, and like Cloud and Zach have a relationship going back as well, right?
Yeah,
And like that has yet to be sort of explained how that's going to play out. And it's interesting in the flashback in this portion, you see Cloud in a wheelchair, slumped in a wheelchair, which is obviously like, a
yeah,
big
callback.
part of the original game that I
Yeah,
don't think makes it into Rebirth, but I wonder like how that all sort of melds together in the end. Like it's not an accident that they put him in a wheelchair,
yeah.
comatose in a wheelchair in that alternate timeline with Zach. Like that's obviously an intentional callback. But does that replace what happens in the original, or is that sort of in concert or in parallel? Like, how are they going to blend all of this together? I have a lot of faith that it's going to come together, but I don't have all the threads I need to
Yeah.
really unravel that yet.
Even where I am, I don't know what.
Yeah,
Like it's they're really saving it to the end, I think. So
yeah. I really hope
I've
they can
seen
put out.
some cutscenes,
Yeah,
but I still don't really know where they're going with it. So
yeah. I hope they get the next game out quick as well. Like,
yeah,
I like, I don't know, waiting for a lot of answers, because the second act of a story doesn't usually ever provide answers, right? Or if it
no,
does, it sort of provides red herrings, it increases stakes, it sort of builds up towards the end game. So I'm not expecting Rebirth to provide answers, right? I'm
no.
expecting it to sort of create more questions before I get to the end, but I'm really gonna want whatever the third game is. I thought it was
I
gonna be
can't even
called.
imagine waiting for Return of the Jedi back in the 80s.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I think that's a
It's like that's the
fabulous
feeling I'm
example,
getting.
right? Yeah,
Yeah,
Empire Strikes Back sort of like, it answers some questions, but those answers just create, 5 more questions.
yeah, exactly.
And I can see the same thing happening here with Rebirth, that, by the end it's like, "Oh, okay, here are all the ways that they've changed things. Here's some stuff that was addressed from the original game, but like for everything that's addressed, you have like, 6 more new question marks about where things are going
Yeah.
next."
Yeah, and so yeah, after the Golden Saucer, the region.
How did you like the games in the Golden Saucer?
I enjoyed it. Like I was going all
Yeah,
over the place.
yeah.
Chocobo's Racing is hilarious because there's actual standalone games of Chocobo Racing now,
Oh,
which I hadn't actually
yeah.
played
Oh,
before.
yeah, yeah, that's
But
right.
it
Yeah,
feels
the
very Mario
cartoon stuff.
Kartish.
Yeah. Yeah, very
So
much
that
so.
was pretty fun.
Yeah.
Even down to like the mechanics, like you can do the what do they call it? Like the drift. They
Yeah,
got
you
the
can
drift
drift the
mechanics.
Chocobo, which is great.
Yeah,
I like that a lot.
and then oh, again, I gotta watch what I say here because
Right.
things change later when I go
Yes.
back to the Golden
Yeah,
Saucer. It,
yeah.
like opens way up.
Oh, more.
Yes,
Interesting.
there's
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, interesting.
I am shocked at the amount of racetracks they have in the
Okay.
Chocobo Racing
Yeah.
when I go back.
Right.
Um, and all of the mechanics with the there's like multiple chocobos and like it's just crazy.
Well,
But
yeah, like when you get to, so like you kind of get to actually race after you leave the Gold Saucer and go down to the Corel prison.
yeah,
And it's like there's a tutorial and it's explaining all of these like, mechanics, and you can outfit your Chocobo with different costume pieces and they all provide different abilities and this and
yes,
that. And I'm
yeah,
like, okay, cool. And then none of that applies in like the story required
yeah.
race where I like
They'll apply
won
later.
by a mile against the best Chocobo racer of all time, who like in the original was like, Joe was tough to beat. Like he was
Yeah,
genuinely hard to beat. You had to breed Chocobos, like, and eventually you would beat Joe. And in this one, it's like I didn't have to do any of the mechanics and stuff that they talk about, and I beat Joe by like a quarter of a lap. But I was like,
yeah,
well, okay, I guess. So, I guess it becomes something bigger later. It
yeah.
sounds like it does.
Yeah. Love, yeah, then there's like the Queen's Blood. There's like a rail shooter
Yeah,
spaceship thing,
that was
which
weird.
was really weird.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
just like, where? And every time I'm playing another mini game, I'm thinking like, when did they have the time to make all these things? Like this
I know.
game was done
Yeah,
in 4 years, and there
yeah.
must be like 400 mini games in here.
Yeah.
Like it's incredible.
I can see them just like handing that off to like, basically like game jams, right? Like internally, like especially
Yeah,
among like younger developers and stuff. It's like, okay, we need we need the boxing game. We need let's replace a submarine game with like a space fighter game. It's like who can make the best one in 4 days.
yeah.
And to just have a game jam over a week and come up with a bunch of mini games.
I can see like Katase were just kind of walking through the building, and then like somebody sitting at a cafe, and I'm like, no, no, no break for you.
Yeah.
Get upstairs and make me a boxing mini game.
Yeah. I feel like, yeah, this whole series is interesting because they put so much work into remake that they were able to repurpose for this one. And from the sounds of it, like hearing Hamaguchi talk, it sounds like they're able to take a lot of the groundwork now created for Rebirth and bringing it into the third and final game.
Yeah,
And like, I feel like it's such a testament for keeping teams around, right? Like keeping the people who created Remake around to work on Rebirth. There's just that institutional knowledge, there's experience, there's excitement, there's an understanding of how the game mechanics work that just kind of creates an opportunity to, in a relatively short period of time for modern games, create one of like the most content filled games I've played in a long time. Um, and I wish and I hope people look at games like Baldur's Gate 3 and Rebirth and say, okay, like these games did something right, and now how can we replicate sort of the studio experiences, the business decisions that went into allowing these teams to make something pretty
Yeah.
magical, within limits that were, smaller than other teams, right? Like whether that's, I'm sure the team on Rebirth was huge, but the timeline wasn't very big.
Well,
And
4
I
years
doubt,
is
yeah, like
crazy. Like,
crazy,
yeah,
right? For a game this size. I
yeah,
doubt, like Larian's studio size was probably not that big for Baldur's Gate 3 compared to an Assassin's Creed game or whatever, right? And so
yeah,
like, look at a game like Rebirth and say, how did they do this? Like, how did they make all these mini games? Well, they were also making an entire huge gigantic world and all that other stuff. How did they do that?
yeah. Well, what are
Bring
they in
that
10
forward.
plus years now for Grand Theft Auto 6?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Long time.
Well, and then yeah, like with the third installment, like they have so much built already. Like I don't even know, like it doesn't feel like they would have to add too much. Like they could just take what they got now and just make some new quests, build the
Yeah.
story. Like I don't even feel like they need to add a whole lot more. It
Yeah.
kind of reminds me of the Like a Dragon experience where you might be walking around Yokohama and Kamurocho for the fourth, fifth, or sixth time, but you still
Yeah.
love it. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
there's new quests,
Absolutely.
there's new story. Like it's why not just reuse it?
Yeah.
Get a game out every couple of years and
I think it's becoming pretty clear that like AAA game development as it stands is unsustainable. Like we just can't keep scaling up
yeah,
infinitely in terms of like complexity and size. And so looking at ways that we can sort of, reuse environments or reuse mechanics or, assets to create games that are, creatively different and differentiated without necessarily having to rely on building everything from the ground up again, I think is going to be really important going forward.
well, if they want to keep building games based on all these Final Fantasy VII models and environments until the day I die,
Yeah, yeah,
I'll be happy.
me too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I guess the end of the region takes place after the Golden Saucer. So there's basically a shootout in the Golden Saucer where a man with an arm, a gun for an arm,
Yeah,
kills a whole lot of Shinra troopers and employees. And
yeah,
Dio, I think it's clear that Dio knows that like you're not involved or whatever, but
yeah.
kind
He's
of thrusts the responsibility on the Cloud and the party to find out who it is. And the underneath I can't remember what they call it, but it's like the Corel prison, I
Corel
guess. Or
Prison. Yeah,
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 that Gus is one character.
yeah. I like him because like he's pretty funny as soon as you meet him, right? He has a really
Yeah,
distinct mannerisms, way of speaking. Then he sort of falls into the like one of my least favorite like story building tropes, which is where he sort of like utters like vague threats of sexual violence against Tifa, Aerith, and Yuffie,
yeah.
which I was like pretty unimpressed by. But then like
It doesn't feel like he's serious though.
no,
It's
it
all
doesn't.
undercut.
And then it gets undercut because when you win the Chocobo race, you can see that like Aerith and Tifa and Yuffie and Kate Sith and Red 13, like they're all partying at the bar with everybody else. Like you
Yeah,
can tell that as soon as Cloud walked around the corner, that Gus guy was like, okay, like he's on his way. Come on out. Let's go have a
yeah,
drink. Like let's go have some fun and watch Chocobo races. And so like I felt like that was a pretty good way of like reversing and undercutting sort of a trope that I was like, oh, why did they go there? Like that's so cheap. And it was like, oh, okay, no, it's actually like
making
kind of
fun of it. Really.
clever the way that they
Yeah,
did that. Yeah. And
yeah,
Cloud is just so serious and would dislike somebody like Gus so much that
yeah,
he would sort of be like, he would take him at face value, right? Like Cloud would totally believe whatever Gus said or threatened, even though Gus, and it's like Gus almost like read him right off the bat perfectly.
yeah. And I'm sure there's a little bit of fear of. I'd be a little worried about pissing off a guy like Cloud, but um,
Yeah, well,
yeah,
absolutely. I love like, and then when you're in Corel prison, there's like you have to go get these like greens, right? For the choke. There's a chocobo that you need to
yeah,
race, but he's like out of energy, so you need to get some greens. And there's
yeah.
these little mini quests, and one of them you sort of
I
like go
like
into a back alley and you get funneled into like
the
a
lying game. Who's lying?
um, oh, the
That was
Lion
actually
game
pretty
was
neat.
good. Yeah, the
Yeah,
Lion
I
game
like
was
that
good.
one.
But these thugs like kind of funnel you back into like a little battle arena, and
Oh
they're gonna like
yeah,
rough you up, and then
yeah,
like you destroy them. It's a really easy battle, and then at the
yeah,
end they're like, "Why didn't you just tell us that you're way out of our league?"
yeah,
Like, and it kind of shows that like there's all these ruffians down in Corel prison, but like Gus doesn't have any real power over
yeah.
somebody like Cloud, right? Like,
Well, it's funny
um,
because they're playing up like how dangerous it was going to be when you go down there, and but
yeah,
then when you actually get down there, it wasn't.
yeah,
It's not nearly
no,
as like
yeah.
ominous as it was made out to be.
Chadley's like hanging out down there. And like,
Yeah,
I think that what the game does really well and what it's always been interested in is showing how communities come together under difficult circumstances, right? Like
yeah,
places, you might have the Sector 7 slums or the Sector 5 slums, but there's still communities full of like real people with real relationships, real families, real lives. And Krill Prison was the same in this game. It's like, yeah, like this is a harsh place to live, but you also see how they kind of come together to create something out of that. And I think that the game has always been interested in looking at opportunities to show that that level of depth in the world.
yeah. So yeah, after you have some fun with Gus and win the chocobo race, they tell you that the man with the gun is in a shack out in the middle of the desert. So after you head out there, they all pretty much know it's not Barrett, but they also don't know what the hell's going on. So when they get there, it was a heartbreaking scene in the original, but man, did it really? It was a knife to the heart in this game when you finally meet Dyne
Yeah.
and and the whole sequence between Barrett and Dyne and watching like it all play out. And um, I guess when you see like, because there was the whole time, it was funny because Yuffie was kind of saying the things that you're thinking when you're there, and everyone's like giving Barrett a hard time, and Yuffie's
Hmm.
like, "Why don't you stand up for yourself?"
Yeah.
And then
Yeah. When you're
you,
going into
yeah,
like North Corel, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And but then the stories explain like how Barrett was on board for getting money from Shinra, and how it led to the
Yeah.
death of the village or whatever. And
Yeah.
yeah, that whole, I mean, you see it in the original with like the little polygons and
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah.
but when you see the two of them like getting shot
Yeah.
like repeatedly on the side,
Yeah.
and then adding Scarlet to it, I think was a neat touch.
Yeah. That was interesting. Just sort of creating that another layer of antagonism to Scarlet, who like
Yeah,
is becoming one of the like not less likable. Like there's a lot of intentionally unlikable villains in this game, like Palmer, but
yeah,
Scarlet, you're just like, ah, like she's just bad, right? Like she's very competent and very good at being a villain, and that sort of just adds to that. It adds, like it's like you see her sort of being authoritative in a funny way when she's using like a trooper as a footstool in the first game.
yeah, that's right.
And then this shows that like she doesn't just sort of like sit back with her layer of authority and
Yeah.
rule that over people. She actually like also acts in a way that an effective villain would act. And I think that was interesting to see that sort of
Yeah.
real dedicated like expansion of how she led to like Barrett's particular circumstance.
Yeah. Well, and it gives Barrett and Yuffie a common ground like that.
Yes.
That's like
Yeah.
one of
Yeah.
the things that helps to
Right.
build their relationship through.
Right.
Yuffie's like, we're gonna get her, but
Yeah.
you don't get her without me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I had a thought about that. All of that I can't remember. Anyway,
But yeah,
this game's great.
that sequence with Dyne
Yeah.
is so painful, especially when Barrett's like, "We can go see Marlene right now."
Oh,
She's,
that's what it was, Marlene.
yeah.
I think that that's such a good payoff for the Marlene and Barrett relationship over the two games, because uh, we had played the original, we knew who Marlene was, but Barrett does have a daughter. That's a very important part of who he is, why he acts the way he does. Like, his motivations are very wrapped up in Marlene and providing a better world for her. And she refers to her as his daughter, and that's it. But over the course of Rebirth, you see, like, even deeper how much he sort of cares for Marlene and how much he wants to do right by Marlene. And you get to the Dyne scene and they connect the dots, and you say, oh, hey, Marlene was Dyne's daughter
Mm,
that Barrett adopted. And, like, Marlene is, he cares for her as a daughter, but he also cares for her because he feels like he failed Dyne, and he can't fail Dyne twice. And I
yeah.
think that that's such wonderful payoff to kind of have that all dovetail into, like, such a highly emotional, well acted, and well choreographed and directed, like, sequence of events that punctuate so much of what Barrett wants and who he is. There was, like, an article uh, recently that was kind of going around social media that people were sort of dogging on a little bit, but it was talking about how, like, Final Fantasy needs black characters who aren't just jokes. And, like, I just couldn't really get there with Barrett in this version of the game. In the original, he was like, just like everyone else was, he was a caricature and an archetype, in a way that wasn't really fleshed out properly. But I think that the writers on this game were really aware of how they needed to make sure that they added depth and complexity to his character, so that he didn't just come across as sort of like a comic relief, like, oh, he swears a lot, oh, he's angry all the time. Like, they
Mhm.
show so many different sides of him to ensure that, like, he isn't just put into, like, typical sort of stereotypes about black characters in video games. And so I just really couldn't square that with Barrett in this game, and this scene in particular. I'm like, I just see it, and I'm like, that's like the heart of Final Fantasy, right? Like, Final Fantasy VII is, you have Cloud, who's on his own, like, weird journey, but Barrett, like, exemplifies the sort of anti-capitalist, pro-environment messaging that creates the foundation of all of Final Fantasy VII's story, and seeing the emotional turmoil that he goes through, and how that turned him from somebody who was, shilling for Shinra, into somebody who was, like, putting everything on the line to destroy and defeat Shinra and create a more equitable universe, or world for his daughter, is like, that's pretty compelling. I think that that's, to me, that's where the real emotional heart of the game's narrative lies.
Yeah, well, it just shows you why it's so important for him to save the planet. Like, he's not trying to save it for himself; he's trying to save it for
No.
Marlene.
Yeah.
And then you see these, like, layers of, it's not just because it's his daughter, but it's,
Yeah.
again, trying to make up for these failures of the past. and
Yeah.
and yeah, and you just see the buildup as
Yeah.
these story beats are unveiled.
And
That
Cloud has that great line when Dio's like, "Oh, it was your friend who shot up the place. Look at this poster." And Cloud's like, "It wasn't Barrett. Look at the security cameras." He was like, "Barrett wouldn't shoot the security cameras because he would want people to see what he was doing. Like,
Yeah,
he isn't holding back. Like, he is going out there and he wants people to know that he's the one, putting his life on the line to save the world, a world that, like, a lot of people are enjoying, all of the things that Mako and Shinra provide. They're happy to turn a blind eye on, the entropy that lies underneath it all.
yeah.
Which is, that's what Final Fantasy VII's message is. And I think that that's more relevant now than it was in 1990.
Oh, really? Yeah, for sure.
1997, right? Like, and it's
Yeah,
remarkable that, like, 27 years ago, this game came out, and, like, I was playing it as a 13-year-old, and I was like, oh, this game's so sweet. Like, and, like, no idea that, like, 27 years later, it would be, like, you know, really foundational to the way that I kind of perceive stuff like capitalism and environmentalism, and the relationship that we have with the planet. Like, I think a lot of that can be tied right back to Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, well, it's funny because like arguably the late '90s might be like the kind of most joyous of,
Yes,
of society, really. Like there,
absolutely. Yeah.
back then there was nobody was thinking like there was it was the most peace I think there's ever been
Yeah.
in the world at the time. Like at the time, I guess, but
Yeah.
the economy was doing great.
Yeah.
And it was reflected in kind of media too, where it's like
Yeah.
yeah, it just feels like things have changed so much since then
Yeah.
that it's funny that the message doesn't hasn't changed that much, but it's more
No.
relevant now than
Yeah, it's wild to me how
almost 30
prescient it
years
is.
ago. Yeah,
The one funny thing that I find though, like, is that like this scene also like goes into like, Dyne being opposed to like the Mako generator, and Mako sort of represents in the late '90s. It represented like nuclear power, right?
yeah,
The opposition to nuclear power, and like Dyne is like banging the drum on the coal machine, the coal train. He's like, yeah, we gotta ramp up coal production,
that's
save the
right.
planet, and like that, so like they got the details wrong, right? Like
Yeah,
they weren't
his
quite
heart was there.
there. His heart was there, but it is pretty funny to hear him, going on about coal in this game and how it's going to save the planet if they just start burning more coal. And I'm like, I don't know if he was quite on point there, but
Yeah.
but
Well,
that's
I kind of like the idea that the world was changing and they didn't and they were kind of both wrong because
yeah,
like if they
totally,
had a wit
yeah,
with dying like
yeah,
then the village would have died like because
yes, yeah,
Mako was taking over so
and
all
that's
the jobs
yeah.
would have went either way so it's like it's one of these like there was no right answer like they
Yeah.
were just doomed.
And that's kind of what capitalism does, right? Like it forces people onto bad paths, right? You
Yeah,
have like, two paths forward and they're both bad. Like, what do you do? And Barrett tried to ride one, and then he realized that the only choice was to say, no, I'm not taking either of those paths. I'm forging my own way and I'm coming
yeah,
for you. And I think that's so like just all of that is exemplified in the Corel region, but specifically like the Corel prison, and then going to find Dyne. Like it's just like after Costa del Sol, after Junon and the boat ride, after all the Johnnies running around, like all of that stuff is so lighthearted. And even the gold saucer is really lighthearted and funny, and then all of a sudden you're just sort of hit in the gut by this
yeah,
Barrett story, and it's like it's such a like dramatic way to sort of like remind you that like, oh no, there's like it's not all sunny and shiny and nice on the surface. Like there's so much pain and suffering out there that's just hidden away from the privileged in this world.
yeah. Yeah, so that probably will take us to the we're pretty much at the end of the region. Um, so the yeah, quite what a way to end that one. And we get to it's funny because technically a lot of the region's blocked off
Yeah,
um, until this point because when Dyne, there's the whole death scene with Dyne, and then um, you fight Shinra a bit, and then Dio
mhm.
gives you this buggy,
Yeah,
which is really really neat, and that kind of opens it up. But
yeah,
I would argue that the areas that are opened up are more for kind of the completion of the intel and the remnant waves and that sort of thing.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The story doesn't really pick up again until you go to the next region,
Yeah.
which is going to be Gungaga. So
I,
yeah, we'll
I'm
probably
amazed that you get the buggy. That's another one of those things in the original game.
yeah,
Like you get the buggy so you can cross rivers or whatever. And I could just see a remake skipping that, right? I could see a remake skipping the tiny Bronco later
yeah.
or whatever. And like the fact that like they give you the buggy is
Well, the
another
mechanics
one of those
are
things where it's like,
hilarious too. Yeah, like
yeah, I
I'm
it,
like
it
running or like trying to drive up walls and
yeah,
getting into funny
like the
situations. Yeah.
like the Mako, was it called the Mako in Mass Effect? I think it was.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah,
same thing, like just a
yeah,
funny buggy to like drive around.
yeah,
But yeah, the desert's funny because, like you said, like a lot of the region is locked off, and you don't get there until sort of the end of this chapter. But you have a quest that is in the desert, right? The
Yeah.
Johnny quest line wants you to go into the desert. And
Yes.
Johnny's like, oh, it's a big pool of water. I don't really know how to get across that. And I'm like, well, I could probably just swim. I can see the other side.
Yeah.
But you can't really get there. And fortunately, somebody had kind
Too
of
many
tipped me
twigs.
off. Too many, yeah, way too many
Too many
twigs.
twigs.
That's right.
Yeah.
Somebody had tipped me off that you can't actually get there until you proceed in the story. But I could have there's a real chance that I would have run around for an hour, like looking into how to get across there. Because up to that point, as soon as you found a quest, you could just complete that quest. They hadn't sort of had gated off areas. So that was kind of tricky. And Johnny tells you can't go over there, but like, it's also Johnny. It's
Yeah.
like,
Well, that's the thing.
one of many Johnnies. I wasn't necessarily going to believe him, but.
No, I think I spent about 45 minutes trying to figure out how to get to the southeastern end of the map,
Yeah.
and then I just decided to Google it, and I'm like, oh crap, okay, yeah, I do have to do this, and this region is the first region where it just you just can't do all the quests because there's 2 proto relic quests that are locked until the final chapter.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
I haven't done as many of the quests in this region as I was in the previous regions.
So you can do everything except 2 proto relic. Once you
Right.
get there, just move on to Gungaga because it's.
I'm so
And
curious.
what's
to see what
annoying though is the
Gungaga's
game
like.
doesn't specifically like they do say, the game says you can't do it right away, but they're not clear. Like, is it one of these things where I just got to run around for a bit and in an hour it'll be unlocked? And it's like, no, like it truly is like you're not getting here till chapter 12. So
it would have been nice if they'd like maybe made a slightly different icon to say like, hey, here's a proto relic quest, but it's locked off for now. Just the version of the proto relic icon on the map, but like with a circle and a line through it or whatever to basically be like, hey, you can't actually access this yet.
Yeah. Well, and it's not even, it's at the end of chapter 12 too. Like I'm at 95% of chapter 12 done.
Yeah.
And then
Crazy.
the guy calls me up on my little gun cell phone or whatever. He's like, oh yeah, those quests that you've been wanting to do for the whole game, they're unlocked now. And I'm like, oh, thanks.
Thanks, bud. Yeah. That's good stuff. I'm excited to see what happens in Gongaga because that was a optional part in the original game, but it's obviously important to Zach and his storyline. So I'm curious to see where that sort of takes things. Yeah. Gongaga was like, I always liked it. I liked that little village in Gongaga that you can explore. And obviously that's usually where I would get Yuffie as well when I play through the original. So I'm curious to see how they sort of integrated into the story in a way that's like, unskippable going forward.
So I guess upcoming episodes we'll have we're going to take a couple weeks off because I think some people even Jordan he didn't quite get there for this episode, so we got to give him a couple weeks to catch up.
I was frantically trying to get to the end of that chapter 8 today.
Exactly.
But yeah, and like I think I was saying off air, like I've got 55 hours in the game. Like I've played Rebirth more than I've played Remake at this point, and I'm still like halfway through.
Yeah. So in a few weeks we'll have a Gongaga episode, and then that'll be followed up with I don't know if I should say the regions. There's another region and then another region. So that's 3 episodes, and then I'm pretty sure it's unlocked. That's it for like unlocking regions. So we'll have a 4th one that'll kind of wrap up our final thoughts on the entirety of the game. Well, and probably a lot of talk about the ending and what we think will be coming in the 3rd one or whatever. Yeah. So so we'll have 4 more episodes coming up throughout the coming months. I would probably say I don't think we're going to tackle so many all in one sitting like we've been doing lately. So I guess Eden, if there's anything you'd like to plug before we wrap it up here.
Yeah, so I mean, I've got a book that I think fans of Rebirth will like. It's called Fight Magic Items. It's a history of Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and the rise of Japanese RPGs in the West. It's available wherever you can buy books, like at your local bookstore in your town. If they don't have it on the shelf, they can order it in or anywhere else. I also have a newsletter that you can keep up with my work and other books and things I'm working on, as well as discrete issues and essays and interviews and all sorts of fun stuff. That's called Astrolabe. You can find it at astrolabe.aidenmoher.com. It's free to sign up and it's pretty fun. Those are probably the best places to find me. I'm no longer on Twitter. I am on Blue Sky, but
Yeah. Under aidenmoher.com, I believe is the
aidenmoher.com.
username.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's me on Blue Sky. So you can find
I
me there.
just I just figured out how to make my website my name.
Yeah, it's once you know how to do it, it's fairly easy,
Yeah.
and it's such a great form of verification because
Oh
it
yeah.
shows that, like, it's not an arbitrary check mark that somebody in support gives you, like old Twitter, and it's not like a badge of dishonor that you
No, and
flaunt
it's
for
much
$8 a month like it is on current Twitter.
much easier to tell someone too, instead of like
Yes.
the username dot blue sky dot whatever. It's
Yeah, yeah,
just
yeah,
no, it's just the
exactly.
yep.
Yeah,
Uh,
I've been trying to find like a good URL that I can, like a domain I can buy that's like, funny or a pun based on my name or
oh
something,
yeah,
something better than namemoher.com.
yeah,
And I will get one, but I haven't found anything too good yet.
yep. Well, yeah. In the meantime, yeah, you'll be able to follow Aiden there, and yeah, we'll definitely have you on for future episodes
Yeah,
coming up.
anytime.
Yep, exactly. So, yeah, I guess. Oh, it's one of our longer episodes in a while, which is nice. So, hopefully, everyone enjoyed our Final Fantasy VII Rebirth talk this episode. And yeah, I guess we'll see everyone out at the next Thirsty Mage. So for now, bye.
Bye.